Okay, I'm going to kick off, although I haven't prepared this presentation, it is Ereen's work. I'm going to explain from a Changes Treatment Centre's perspective the biopsychosocial model, and as soon as Ereen is online and ready to go, then I'm sure she'll take over. So often how I describe the biopsychosocial model is as a triangle of mind, body, and soul. So body, soul, body, mind, and soul. So when somebody comes into treatment, we have to, more often than not, have to do a detox. And when they do the detox, we need to use a medical model to help them through withdrawals. This will vary from person to person and substance to substance. And once they're off the substance, that's when the psychiatrists take over and they start ascertaining through assessments and diagnoses if there's an underlying psychiatric or organic condition or disorder. We put our clients onto appropriate mood stabilizing and psychiatric medication to assist them in the journey of recovery. And once those meds start kicking in, it then allows the psycho, which is the psychological side of addiction, to start being addressed. And in that psycho side, we deal with addiction as an illness, not as a badness, not as a weakness, not as a moral issue, but as a dis-ease or disease. So once we find the detox has happened, we can start doing the individual counseling, start focusing on the group therapy, start integrating social skills, life skills into the person's process. That can with the psychology. And I often say to our clients, we don't have enough time. 3 weeks is often not enough time in treatment to address a person's whole lifespan of psychological struggles or issues. So very often we deal with the addiction as the primary illness. And all our patients need to start working on step one, and they need to start writing their life story and presenting their 60 stories. Whilst they're doing that in the group therapy that they are experiencing, they then learn how their behavior affected their society and how they view themselves in society. So if we look at the biopsychosocial triangle and we say, okay, your body became dependent on the substance. Your mind was definitely dependent on the substance because you wanted to use the substance in order to escape, keep your mind quiet, deal with underlying anxieties, etc. The social is sometimes we've got to teach them how to behave. We often find in treatment their behavior becomes quite toxic or inappropriate. And it starts by saying please and thank you. We ask people that they use their full names, that they behave in the microcosm of society, which is what the treatment center represents. And we often find that however they behaved at home or at work with their families, we get to see that behavior back in treatment. And the program is designed, and the treatment program is designed to start addressing that. So very often people ask us, why do they have to do chores? And we say, well, because they didn't do those chores at home. Somebody else was picking up the pieces, somebody else was cleaning, somebody else was doing shopping, somebody else was making their bed. So after detox, literally on day 3 or 4 of treatment, we expect our patients to start making their beds. And part of that is they've got to learn how to live in a social environment with their families, with their partners, with their children's community, etc. And I often say to people that I treat, my patients and clients, you're not judged by what you think and feel, but you are judged by what you do. Okay, Ereen has just joined the room. And people are holding you accountable for your actions and how you relate to people, how you react to people, and that determines, it tells people who you are. So in the treatment process of realigning the thoughts and the behaviors, we start holding them accountable for their actions, but we also then work through the thoughts and the feelings. Because most addicts come into treatment with a lot of shame. And believe it or not, and it might sound quite bizarre, but a lot of the shame is what they think and feel. We have to point out how their behavior became inappropriate. So the shame often is they feel less than, inadequate, not good enough, carrying the scars of what they've done. But it's more around how they think people view them. And whilst they're doing group therapy and they hear that other people have similar kinds of behaviors, it starts helping and addressing the shame. Ereen, are you there? Are you
Hi,
ready?
Cheryl.
Hi.
Sorry, everyone, for my technical difficulties.
Thank you, Ereen. I've just given a brief overview. I haven't started your workshop. So if you don't mind, I'm going to click to the next slide.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Welcome, everyone. I know Cheryl has told you guys what we're going to be talking about this evening. I'd like us to go through firstly the table of contents, so what we'd be actually going into and what I'll be unpacking today. So Cheryl, if we can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So what we're going to be looking at this evening is a brief history of the biopsychosocial model, and then we're going to be looking at 4 models that researchers have historically investigated related to addictive behavior. Then we're going to go into the biopsychosocial factors of addiction and how addiction as a disease may progress. And then we're going to look at other individual differences and environmental variables that influence substance use. And then we're going to conclude. Cheryl, next slide, please. Thank you. So the brief history. So let's start at what is the biopsychosocial model? The biopsychosocial model of addiction postulates that biological/genetic, psychological, and social cultural factors contribute to substance use, and all must be taken into consideration in prevention and treatment efforts. So the biopsychosocial model emerged in response to the criticisms of the biomedical model, which has historically dominated the fields of addiction studies. So a very intuitive man, we can call him intuitive, George Engel, he authored a seminal paper called The Calling for the Abandonment of the Biomedical Model of Illness. So he favored the biopsychosocial model because of all the limitations he found. So some of the limitations he found was that how come some people historically have a genetic predisposition to substance usage and they don't develop addictive substance dependence disorders, and why some people who historically don't have genetic predisposition or the biological makeup do develop substance use disorders. So George said that let's look at the disease of addiction or substance dependence as a holistic pathology. And that's how the biopsychosocial model came about. So before we go, next slide, please, Cheryl. So we just need one up. Thank you. So when we think about the models of addiction, so these are the models that were investigated before the biopsychosocial model. And there's one model that is actually very similar to the biopsychosocial model that we'll get to. So as you can see by the names, for example, the moral model. The moral model postulates that people who suffer from problems of addiction are responsible for both acquiring and solving the problem. People who become addicted are seen as morally weak with poor willpower, and they must will their way through addiction in order to recover. Now you can see with the brief description of this model that it's actually quite punishing. You know, how do I have any insight into my disease, the disease of addiction, what I'm struggling with, if I'm being condemned? And it's actually quite an old historical model that is actually, it is still practiced, and it's practiced by a lot of rehabilitation facilities that do use religion-based practices. And then the enlightenment model, it is endorsed by the AA, or Alcoholics Anonymous, and other 12-step philosophies, and requires people to seek recovery by turning the problem over to the higher power. Only a higher power can cure addiction, and this is a person's task to form and strengthen a relationship with a spiritual entity so that this entity can solve the addiction problem. So yes, AA and 12-step programs do use the enlightenment model, but the AA programs and 12-step programs have grown since the enlightenment model did come about. And it's not about having a stereotypical, you know, God, Buddha, Allah. It's the system, the AA system can be seen as a higher power for addicts in recovery. And then the medical disease model emerged in response to the moral and enlightenment models. In the medical model, the addict is responsible neither for the development of the problem nor for its resolution. This model posits a biological genetic predisposition for addiction and an underlying disease process, and assumes that the disease is progressive. And we have discussed the medical disease model. The compensatory model holds that people are not responsible for developing the addictive problem, but are responsible for their own recovery. In the compensatory model, the role of multiple factors in the development of addictive behavior is noted, including the biological predisposition, early experiences, and social and cultural variables. And the continued use of substances is viewed as a way to cope with stress. Of these four models, the compensatory model is the most similar to the biopsychosocial model. So the biopsychosocial model of addiction, science has not discovered a single factor that can explain why some people use substances and why they can use substances without the disease being progressive, while others abuse or become dependent on the substance. So previous models can't explain this. Instead, the available evidence suggests that biological, genetic, personality, psychological, cognitive, social, cultural, and environmental factors interact to produce the substance use disorder. So meaning that the interaction of all of these factors are important and hold the equal weight in determining the outcome of, for example, a substance use disorder. So the interaction of these factors to produce substance use problems is the core tenet of the biopsychosocial model of addiction. This model is a way to understand and explain the problem of addiction, and therefore also prevent and treat addiction. So Cheryl, if you could please have the next slide for the biological factors. Thank you. So some of the biological factors and the development of addictive behaviors. So given the right environment, biological and genetic predispositions may increase the risk of substance use problems. So an adoption and twin studies have found that substance abuse is to some extent hereditable. So male children of an alcohol-dependent parent have 4 times the risk of becoming problem drinkers compared with the children of non-dependent parents. So that shows a potential direct link between modeling substance in the home, but as well as the genetic predisposition. So there's 2 things that are at play here: modeling the alcohol-dependent behavior, as well as the genetic predisposition. So among adults with alcohol dependence, Male children of an alcohol-dependent parent have 4 times the risk of becoming problem drinkers compared with the children of non-dependent parents. So they have 4 times the risk of becoming dependent on alcohol. It has been reported that 30.8% of people with alcohol dependence had at least one alcohol-dependent parent. Among adults with alcohol dependence, 27% have alcohol-dependent fathers and 4.9% have alcohol-dependent mothers. This also speaks to the difference in the genders, male and female, is that there's a higher rate of substance usage among women as there is to men. Compared with alcohol dependence among 5.2% of fathers and 1.2% of mothers of people without alcohol dependence. Among twin pairs in which one twin was diagnosed with alcohol dependence, they found that with monozygotic twins, there is a 54.2% chance of developing alcohol dependence if you're a monozygotic twin. And that just shows how genetics is at play and how strong the genetic predisposition is. With dizygotic, which is less, the DNA is less similar, there's a 31.5% chance. So calculated hereditability ranges from 40 to 90% across studies, with more chronic and severe forms of alcohol dependence showing greater estimates of heritability. So there's a 40 to 90% chance of substance use having a genetic predisposition, or having substance dependence, if there is a genetic predisposition. However, it is important to note that someone with a strong genetic predisposition to alcohol still needs to engage in substance use before the addictive behavior becomes manifests. A genetic predisposition towards addiction does not influence the substance of choice to which a person may become addicted. Instead, it is associated with an increased propensity towards addictive behavior in general. Despite the strong evidence of the role of genetic influence on alcohol use behavior, biology is still insufficient to account for the entirety of the substance dependence or substance dependence disorder. There still remains cases where people with no known genetic risk become addicted and cases where people with great genetic risk do not. We need to acknowledge the psychosocial variables to explain these occurrences, and that these variables may interact with genetic and biological risk to cause addiction. Cheryl, if you please move to the next slide. So with regards to the psychosocial factors and the development of addictive behaviors, we're going to be looking at the risk factors in children, personality and temperament, conditioning, and outcome expectations or expectancies. So when we're looking at risk factors in children, much research has been conducted on childhood variables that increase the risk for alcohol dependence and substance use disorders. So there's an increased likelihood of substance dependence, alcohol usage, drug usage in victims of abuse who exhibit externalizing behaviors, such as those seen in having conduct issues, attention, ADHD, and ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. In particular, antisocial and deviant behaviors such as aggression, hostility, vandalism, rebelliousness, and association with deviant peer groups place one at risk for substance use disorders later in life. Antisocial personality disorder is highly comorbid with substance abuse and dependence, and antisocial behaviors in childhood act as strong predictors of substance problems in adulthood. This is independent of a family history of substance abuse. This validates the importance of the biopsychosocial model, that biology is not a sufficient etiological model on its own. And if we go to personality traits or personality variables that impact later substance use, this includes high sensation seeking, so that reward system looking for external stimulus, low harm avoidance, not avoiding dangerous situations, negative affectivity, and then Emotions, I don't like to use the word negative affectivity because I don't think any emotions are negative. But with negative affectivity and personality variables as almost an etiological point or factor for substance dependence, it would be frustration, anger, aggression, reward dependence, and other temperament variables that predict later substance problems are low attention capacity, high emotionality, not being able to regulate one's emotions, low sociability, impulsivity, and a difficult temperament in childhood. This is defined as high activity level, low flexibility, mood instability, and social withdrawal. This has been shown to predict substance abuse in adolescence. One research study found that a difficult temperament in childhood was a stronger predictor of later alcohol dependence than a family history of alcohol dependence. Now, to explain the conditioning aspect, I'd like to play a video for you guys. And it's about a little bird called Kiwi. So Cheryl, if you'd please go to the next slide. And just press play, bottom. Thank you.
Play out.
Go back to the previous slide. Thank you. So little Kiwi presents with it shows us a conditioned response. So little Kiwi identified, little bird, identified or remembered his first high. And now I'm not saying this happens to all addicts where they use because they remember their first high, but it does happen to a lot of addicts. So little Kiwi followed the stimulus because he remembered and he was conditioned to associate the feelings that he had with that first high. And I mean, it's a cute little video, and it usually has a cute little sound, music to go with it, but there seems to be something wrong with the audio. But it's such a nice illustration around how addicts can get conditioned into this reward system where I remember what it's like, I know what substances can do for me, it helps me forget, it helps me not go through for a moment, just for a moment, so I don't have to think about what I'm going through, the feelings that I'm feeling, these overwhelming feelings. And behavioral theorists speak about this conditioning. There was a very famous experiment done by Pavlova. It's called Pavlova's dog, I think it's called. And it was an experiment where they found every time there was a dog and every time they would feed the dog and put the food down, the dog would salivate. So what they did, and they had the idea that, well, okay, maybe I can make a stimulus that is not conditioned, or a stimulus that has no relation to the dog food. I can make it a conditioned stimulus. So meaning if they would attach a bell with the food, and so what they would do is they put the food down. Before they put the food down, they would ring a bell, and there would be no response from the dog. But they continuously paired the food with the bell. And what they found is that the dog would salivate for the bell and without the food being there. So what happens is that there's a conditioned response that the dog identifies with the bell, which is the food. And that's the same with addiction. And that's why we're so firm in, saying to our patients and our clients that be aware of people, places, and things that are not, that could be neutral and not related to your using, but for you it means something. So that would be conditioning. And then outcome expectancies. Addiction is not merely a physiological response to something that feels good and is rewarding. It is influenced strongly by the labeling, interpretation, and meaning that a person associates to substance. Outcome expectancies are conditioned cognitions. It is a person's beliefs about the effects of using alcohol or another substance will bring about. You'll find that with your own loved ones who develop substance use problems, they may report that when they use, they avoid or escape negative emotions or real life events that they just don't want to go through. Thank you, Cheryl. If you could please go 2 slides, so skip the video onto the 10th slide. Thank you. Thanks, Cheryl. So social influences on substance use. So there are a lot more in terms of social influences, but I've identified 3 main ones, and I thought that it might be applicable to our audience, which is families, peers, spouses, and intimate partners. So family. So in addition to genetic factors, addictive behaviors are transmitted between generations in families due to social influences. So the social learning theory suggests that modeling influences behavior, and that adolescents who observe substance use in their parents are more likely to use substances themselves. So a very common question that I get when working with families, and the primary the primary isn't the addiction. So in working in my private practice, a lot of parents will come and say, I'm having difficulty with my adolescent or my teenager, and I just don't know how to communicate with them, because I'm trying to balance the two. I'm trying to be a parent. I'm also trying to be a friend. I'm trying to be the parent that allows them to drink with me or use at home, or use in terms of alcohol, and being open about sex and having open lines of communication, which is helpful. But we've got to be aware of the boundaries of being a parent and being a friend. And I always tell families that. And it's important to note how it translates, or how it moves from adolescence into adulthood, the norms, because our teenagers and our adolescents take this into adulthood and they implement it in their families, and they continue the cycle of modeling those behaviors. And then peers. Having a peer group that uses substances acts as a strong predictor for adolescent substance use, as is the perception that one's peer group endorses substance use. And I mean, we can perhaps identify this in our own family members or not. But how many times have we said, it's because you're hanging around with Johnny, that's why you can't stop using weed? Or you're hanging around with Sarah, Sarah's not good for you. And, you know, perhaps early on in our processes with our family members who are struggling with substance usage, we might externalize the blame, but we know better in terms of, you know, our family member taking responsibility in this, and treatment being their process. And peers can, as I said, doesn't only have to be a thing in adolescence, it can be a thing in adulthood. You know, sometimes people will call other friends or family over and drink with them because they don't want to feel that guilt and shame. They want to normalize that, you know, I don't actually have a problem, but I'm doing it socially, and it's just another excuse. And then spouses and intimate partners. Research has supported spousal concordance in substance use behavior, meaning wives and husbands tend to use the same substances, and heavy drinking or drug use in one partner predicts heavy use in the other partner. I think this speaks loud and clear to the enabling nature of two addicts being together, and to people struggling with substance use problems, and the chaos that comes with that. And problem drinkers are disproportionately more likely to be married to other problem drinkers. So chaos breeds chaos. Chaos is attracted to chaos, and that's no different for substance abuse issues. Okay, next slide, please, Cheryl. Okay, so now we're on to other individual differences and environmental variables that influence substance use. That's ethnicity. I mean, ethnicity, we form part of a multicultural society, and the percentages of individuals who, so between the races, the percentage of using differs from race to race. I had a lovely table with all of the percentages and the different provinces of the different substances and the correlation between the three. And I can't seem to find it, but there is differences in ethnicities in terms of using, and this might be linked to socioeconomic status, this might be linked to education, this might be linked to gender, to poverty, and culture and religion, and you can go on and on and on and on. But the three most powerful are gender, ethnicity, and poverty, as identified by research. So gender, across cultures, males smoke more, use more drugs, consume more alcohol, and have more alcohol and other substance use disorders than females. Among women, but not men, becoming a parent is also associated with decreased risk for drinking problems. Other risk factors for addiction, such as childhood physical and sexual abuse, depression, intimate partner violence, PTSD, may play an important role in the initiation and maintenance of drug use amongst women, more than among men. Women also report a greater propensity to use substances to alleviate negative emotions than men would. And then poverty. Socioeconomic status also affects substance use behavior. Poverty is an established risk factor for alcohol and drug problems, and low income is associated with alcohol dependence and comorbid psychiatric disorders. This may be because drug trafficking and selling is more prevalent in lower socioeconomic areas. Okay, so we're on to the conclusion. Okay. So conclusion, in summary, there's a great deal of evidence supporting the biopsychosocial model of addiction, which gives weight to biological, psychological, and social factors in understanding the development and progression of substance use problems. Research supports the role of biological factors such as genetic predisposition in the development of addictive behaviors. At the same time, there's support for psychological and cognitive factors. In order to prevent and treat addictive behaviors, attention must be paid to the biological, psychological, and social factors that interact to produce and maintain disorders of addiction. And this is why we endorse the biopsychosocial model at Changes, because our belief is that this is a disease that affects every part of your life, and therefore it will have causes or etiological factors that will cause addiction and substance-related disorders. The evidence clearly indicates the importance of factors in all three realms, and successful treatment programs will benefit from taking a biopsychosocial view of the problem of addiction. Thank you.